I was 10 when I first understood that there were two different worlds, the one I lived in and the one I was never meant to enter. I had never thought about it before, not really to me. The world was just my neighborhood, my school, my friends, the corner store where my mom bought groceries, the church where my father shook hands with other men who looked like him. But then one summer, everything changed. My mother worked as a housekeeper cleaning homes in the nicer part of town. She would come home tired, her hands rough from scrubbing her uniform, smelling like other people's lives. I never thought much about it until one day she took me with her. I remember stepping into that house, marble floors so shiny I could see my reflection, chandeliers bigger than anything I had ever seen, windows so tall they let the whole sky in. A boy my age sat on the couch watching cartoons. He looked at me, then turned back to his show like I was invisible. His mother walked in, smiled at my mom, but not at me. "You can have him wait in the back," she said, pointing toward the kitchen. Not the living room, not the couch with the boy, not even the den where there were chairs. The back. I didn't understand, but I understood the look in my mother's eyes. So I went to the kitchen, sat on a stool, and watched as my mother worked. I watched the woman's son walk through his house like it belonged to him, because it did. I watched as his mother ruffled his hair as if the world was soft for him, as if it had always been. I sat there and realized for the first time that no matter how hard my mother worked, no matter how many floors she scrubbed, she would always be in the background. And so would I. By the time I was 16, I knew the rules. I knew which stores to avoid, which streets to take, which faces to smile at to seem less threatening. But knowing the rules didn't mean I was safe. One night I was walking home from my part-time job I had taken the long way. The street was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes your skin prickle. I was halfway home when I heard the tires screech. A black SUV slowed beside me, the windows rolled down. A white man leaned out his eyes, scanning me like I was a problem he needed to solve. "You lost?" he asked. "No," I said, keeping my voice calm. "Sure about that." I kept walking, but the car followed. "Where you headed?" He laughed low, cold. Then the words that made my stomach twist. "Not sure you belong around here." I didn't run. Running would have made it worse. I didn't argue. Arguing would have made it worse. I just walked faster. My hands in sight, my breathing steady. When I finally reached my street, the car kept going, disappearing into the night like it had never been there at all. But I knew better. I knew it would always be there waiting in one form or another. When I got into college, I thought maybe things would change, maybe in the city things would be different, but racism doesn't disappear, it just wears a different face. I was one of 3 black students in my program. The first time I raised my hand in a lecture hall, the professor called on me with a smirk. "Let's hear the black perspective." The first time I corrected a classmate during a group discussion, he narrowed his eyes and said, "Wow, you're really opinionated." The first time I walked into a party, someone handed me a drink and said, "You must be the DJ, right?" It was in the small things, the pauses before saying my name, the way people glanced when I entered a room, the way security always seemed to be near me in stores. Then one day I went to a job fair, my resume perfect, my suit sharp, my confidence high. I walked up to a recruiter, smiled, offered my hand. He hesitated before shaking it, glanced at my name badge, raised an eyebrow. Then he said the words that made my whole body go cold. Diversity hires are really important to us. I nodded, smiled, walked away, and inside I burned. I had spent my whole life trying to prove I was worthy, trying to show I belonged, but the truth was they had already decided. No matter how hard I worked, no matter how many degrees I earned, no matter how much I smiled and spoke softly, and made sure to never seem too angry, too loud, too much. They had already decided. But that night I made a decision too. I wasn't going to shrink myself, I wasn't going to keep quiet, I wasn't going to spend my life asking for a seat at their table. I was going to build my own. I used to believe that success would protect me, that once I had the degree, once I had the job, once I had proven myself, no one could deny that I belonged. But I was wrong. Success doesn't shield you from racism, it only makes the target on your back more visible. It started with my first job, a well-paying corporate position in a downtown skyscraper. I had worked twice as hard to get there, had sat through interview after interview, proving I was the best candidate. I told myself this was my moment, my chance to show that I was more than what people assumed. The first week, I noticed the looks, the way some of my colleagues hesitated before speaking to me, the way others would talk over me in meetings as if I wasn't even there. Then one afternoon, a senior manager walked past my desk and casually asked whose assistant I was. Not what I did, not which department I worked in, but whose assistant. I smiled tightly, said, "I'm an analyst." His eyebrows lifted slightly. "Oh, really? Well, that's great. Good for you." Good for me. I laughed about it later, but the weight of it sat heavy in my chest. A few months in, I was given a major project, a chance to prove myself. My ideas were solid, my research was flawless. I worked late nights, double-checked every detail. The day of the big meeting, I stood at the front of the conference room ready to present. I had rehearsed every line, but before I could begin, my manager interrupted, turned to my white colleague and said, "Why don't you start us off?" My colleague glanced at me, hesitated, then cleared his throat and started explaining my project. I stood there listening to my own ideas come out of his mouth, watching as the executives nodded approvingly, watching as my manager smiled and said, "Now that's what I like to hear." When he finished, they praised him, shook his hand, told him how insightful his presentation had been. No one even looked at me. That night I sat at my desk long after everyone had gone home, staring at the city lights, wondering what else I had to do to be seen. But the real breaking point came a year later when I was up for promotion. I had done the work, I had the numbers, I had the results. I walked into the meeting confident, ready, but my manager shook his head, smiled that same tight-lipped smile and said, "We've decided to go in a different direction." The promotion went to someone else, someone who had been at the company half as long as me, someone who had asked me for help on multiple occasions, someone who had never had to prove they belonged. When I asked why, my manager sighed as if he was being patient with me, As you know, leadership is about culture fit. Culture fit. Another way of saying not you. That night I drafted my resignation letter, but I didn't send it. Instead, I sent an email to HR outlining every moment of discrimination, every time my work had been dismissed, every comment, every microaggression, everything. The response was exactly what I expected. We take these concerns very seriously. They said, we will conduct a review. They said, thank you for bringing this to our attention. They said, nothing changed. A few weeks later, I left, but not before I made sure people knew why. I wrote about my experience. I spoke about it at networking events. I told other Black professionals the truth that no matter how much you achieve, the system is not built for you. And then something happened. A year later, I got an email from someone who had read my story. A young Black woman who had just started at the same company. She wrote, "Thank you for saying something. I thought I was going crazy." And in that moment, I knew that my success was never going to be measured by their promotions or their approval. It was going to be measured by how many doors I could break open for the people coming after me. Isaiah Carter had always been told that ambition had its limits. Not the kind of limits that came from talent or intelligence, he had plenty of both, but the kind imposed on men like him, men with dark skin, sharp minds, and the audacity to believe they belonged where history had kept them out. For Isaiah, that place was Bradbury and Finch, one of the oldest law firms in Manhattan. A place where legacy mattered more than merit, where the name on your diploma was less important than the name on your family estate. Isaiah had neither, but he had fought for everything he had. Top of his class at Harvard, clerked for a federal judge, a track record of victories that had forced Bradbury and Finch to take him seriously. Now, 6 years in, he was on the verge of making partner, or so he thought. The moment he walked into the conference room, he felt it. The shift in the air, the way the senior partners glanced at him, avoiding eye contact. He had seen this play before, felt it in his gut before they even opened their mouths. "Isaiah," William Bradbury III said, clearing his throat, "we appreciate everything you've done for this firm. You've been invaluable to our success." Isaiah nodded, waiting. "But after careful consideration, we've decided to go in a different direction." Here it was. The rejection dressed up in polite words. The finality in their voices already decided long before this meeting had even been scheduled. Isaiah exhaled, slowly. He wasn't the only one up for partner, but he was the only Black attorney in the entire firm, and he had outperformed every single one of them. After the meeting, Isaiah locked himself in his office. The walls felt smaller now. The view from his window, once a symbol of everything he had achieved, felt like a cage. He had given everything to this place, worked twice as hard, stayed twice as late, and still it hadn't been enough. He thought about walking away, let them have this world that wasn't made for him. But then his phone buzzed. A message from Ava Sinclair, a journalist he had known since college. "Saw the news. I have something you might want to see." A file attachment. Isaiah clicked it, and what he saw changed everything. Ava had sent him internal emails from the firm, conversations between partners, and there, buried in the exchanges, his name, and next to it, "Not the right fit. The clients may not respond well. Optics are a concern." They hadn't denied him partnership because he wasn't good enough. They had denied him because they had never intended to let a Black man sit at their table. Isaiah felt something sharp crack inside him. Rage. Not just for himself, but for every young black associate who would walk through these doors, believing that talent was enough. Isaiah didn't quit. He didn't rage in the halls or slam his resignation letter on Bradbury's desk. Instead, he planned and waited. Because when you go up against men like William Bradbury III, you don't just burn the house down. You make sure they never rebuild it. 2 months later, the lawsuit landed like a bomb. Racial discrimination, systemic bias, hiring and promotion practices designed to exclude black attorneys. Isaiah wasn't just suing for himself. He was representing every black lawyer who had been passed over, shut out, forced to leave, or told in whispers that they had reached their ceiling. A class action lawsuit, one that Ava's investigative piece had already put in national headlines. And the best part? He wasn't alone. 5 former black associates had come forward, then 10, then 20. Bradbury and Finch had spent a century hiding its history. Isaiah was about to expose every single part of it. The firm fought back. They called him a disgruntled employee. They tried to bury the evidence. They even sent settlement offers, desperate to make him disappear. Isaiah didn't blink. This wasn't about just one man's career. This was about what came next. And what came next was justice. A year later, Bradbury and Finch collapsed under the weight of its own sins. The lawsuit had unearthed decades of corruption. Old cases reopened, federal investigations launched. The firm bled out. Slow, public, and brutal. By the time it was over, Bradbury and Finch was no more. But Isaiah was just getting started. He built something new. Not a firm that only made space for men like him, but one that made sure no one else ever had to fight this fight alone again. He created the doors they had tried to keep shut. And when young black lawyers walked through them, they never had to wonder if they belonged, because now they did. Isaiah Carter had never been a man who let the past define him. He had built his career on resilience, on outmaneuvering obstacles designed to keep him out, and on forcing doors open that were never meant for men like him. But some doors, once opened, revealed more than expected. It had been a year since Bradbury and Finch collapsed under the weight of its own sins. Isaiah had taken them down, exposed them for the racist, exclusionary institution they had always been. The legal world had felt the shockwave, and for a brief moment, he had believed real change was coming. But now, a year later, he realized something. The system wasn't broken. It was built this way. And he wasn't done fighting. Isaiah sat at the conference table in his new firm, Carter & Sinclair LLP, the law practice he had built with Ava Sinclair and a handful of former Bradbury associates. They had made a name for themselves in just a few months, representing black professionals, employees, and entrepreneurs who had been shut out, silenced, or discarded by a system designed to preserve power in the hands of the few. But this new case? This was different. This wasn't just about one firm. This was about the entire legal system itself. Ava slid a thick folder across the table, her expression tight. "You need to see this." Isaiah flipped it open. Pages of documents, whistleblower testimonies, internal memos, and at the center of it all, Judge Everett Wallace, one of the most powerful federal judges in the country, a man whose decisions had shaped legal precedent for decades, a man who had ruled against discrimination lawsuits time and time again, and a man who, as Isaiah was now reading, had been accepting bribes, manipulating jury selections, and outright rigging trials to keep black plaintiffs from ever seeing justice. Isaiah let out a slow breath, staring at the evidence in front of him. "Tell me this isn't real." Avo leaned forward, voice low. "It's real. We've got financial records, leaked communications. Hell, we even have an eyewitness willing to testify that he was paid to throw cases." Isaiah clenched his jaw. He had spent years arguing in front of judges like Wallace. How many times had he fought cases that were rigged before they even began? "How do we take him down?" Isaiah asked. Ava hesitated. "That's the problem," she said. "This isn't just Wallace. He's connected. The whole circuit is tainted. If we pull on this thread, we might unravel something much bigger than just one judge." Isaiah closed the folder. "Good," he said. "Then we pull." Taking down a judge wasn't like taking down a law firm. This wasn't about lawsuits or class actions. This was about exposing corruption at the highest levels of the legal system, and that meant playing a game even more dangerous than before. Step 1. The witness. His name was Marcus Hall, a former court clerk who had worked under Wallace for 5 years. He had seen everything: the backroom deals, the quietly dismissed motions, the way Wallace had blacklisted certain lawyers from ever winning cases. And now he was ready to talk. But there was a problem. Marcus had disappeared. Isaiah and Ava tracked him to a small town in South Carolina, where he had gone into hiding after receiving threats. When they found him, he was terrified. "They'll kill me if I talk," Marcus said, his voice shaking. Isaiah leaned in. "If you don't talk, they win." How many cases did Wallace throw? How many people lost everything because of him? Marcus ran a hand over his face. "Too many." Isaiah pulled out his phone. "Then let's make sure the world hears about it." They recorded his statement that night, and the moment it went public, the entire system shook. Step 2. The paper trail. The statement alone wasn't enough. Isaiah and Ava needed proof. Bank records, case files, patterns in Wallace's rulings that lined up too perfectly with the firms and corporations paying him off. They dug deep, and what they found? Wallace wasn't just taking bribes. He was deciding who went to prison and who walked free. He was selling justice to the highest bidder. And black defendants? They never had a chance. Step 3. The battle. Isaiah knew what would come next. The moment they exposed Wallace, the entire system would fight back. Powerful people would close ranks, evidence would be lost, the media would be bought. But Isaiah had learned something from Bradbury and Finch. You don't fight the system from the inside. You burn it down. The first attack came fast. Wallace's legal team accused Marcus of fabricating evidence. Then came the smear campaign against Isaiah himself. Radical, disgruntled former employee as a vendetta against the legal system. The same playbook, the same tactics. Isaiah didn't flinch, because this time he had something they couldn't bury. When the FBI got involved, it was over. The investigation moved beyond Wallace. It spread through the judicial system like wildfire. Judges, prosecutors, police departments. The connections ran deeper than anyone had imagined. Wallace was just the first domino to fall, and by the time the dust settled, 20 judges were indicted. Dozens of convictions were overturned. Lives that had been stolen were finally returned. And Isaiah Carter? He had done it again, not just for himself, but for every black defendant who had never stood a chance. for every case that had been lost before it even began, for every person who had been told that justice was blind when it had been staring at them the whole time, deciding they didn't belong. The night of the final ruling, Isaiah stood outside the courthouse, staring up at the city skyline. Ava joined him, hands in her pockets. "Think they'll rebuild?" she asked. Isaiah exhaled, shaking his head. "They always do." She smiled. "Then we'll just have to tear it down again." Isaiah chuckled. For the first time in a long time, he felt something close to hope. Not because the system was fixed, but because now they knew who to fear. David Reynolds had spent years trying to forget the past, but some things refused to be buried. When he left Greenville, Mississippi for college, he swore he'd never come back. But fate had a way of pulling people back to the places they wanted to escape. His father's health had been declining, and duty called him home. The town hadn't changed much. The same streets, the same people, the same undercurrent of something unspoken. It was the kind of place where history wasn't just remembered, it lingered. The past wasn't a ghost in Greenville. It was a shadow that followed you everywhere. David stepped out of his car and looked at the old house. Paint chipped off the wooden siding, the porch sagged in places, and the windows carried the weight of years of dust. He had spent his childhood here, but it had never felt like home. As he walked up the steps, the screen door creaked open. His father, Henry Reynolds, stood there, his frame thinner than David remembered, his once strong presence dulled by illness. "Didn't think you'd come," Henry said, voice gruff. David sighed. "Didn't have a choice, did I?" His father nodded and stepped aside to let him in. The inside of the house smelled the same. Old wood, faded memories, and a hint of something bitter, like regret. Henry sat down in his chair by the window, looking out at the street like he always did. David set his bags down. "How bad is it?" Henry shrugged. "Bad enough." The silence stretched between them. They had never been close, and the years apart hadn't helped. Later that night, David went out for a drive. He didn't know why. Maybe to clear his head, maybe just to remind himself why he left in the first place. The streets were quiet, but there were eyes everywhere. Greenville had never been welcoming to outsiders, and in many ways, David had always been one. As he drove past the diner on Main Street, he saw a group of men sitting outside, their laughter carrying through the night. When his car slowed at the red light, one of them, a man in his 40s with a thick beard, leaned forward. "Didn't expect to see you back here," he said. David recognized him, Tom Grayson. They had gone to high school together. "Didn't plan on it," David replied. Tom smirked. "Guess you got tired of playing city boy." David didn't reply. The light turned green. He drove off, the weight of their words settling in his chest. That night, sleep didn't come easy. The house creaked with age, and the memories pressed in. He thought about the first time he realized Greenville wasn't like the places he read about in books. He had been 12 when he saw his father arguing with a white man in town. David didn't remember the man's name, only the way he had looked at them, like they were less than. Henry hadn't backed down, but later that night he told David something that had stayed with him ever since. "This town don't forget, son, and it don't forgive neither." David hadn't understood then, but he did now. The next morning he decided to go for a walk. The air was thick with humidity, the sun already pressing down hard. As he walked through town, people stared. Some nodded in recognition, others just watched. At the grocery store, an older woman behind the counter hesitated before ringing him up. "Didn't think we'd see you again," she said, bagging his items. David forced a smile. Guess life had other plans. She didn't smile back. As he stepped outside, he saw something that made his stomach turn. A sign nailed to a wooden post near his car. It was old, faded, but the words were clear. Columbus Koshiensen and Jax Haley. His breath hitched. He looked around. No one else seemed to notice. Or care. His hands clenched. Wasn't real. It couldn't be. But when he reached out, his fingers brushed against the rough wood, the chipped paint. It was real, and worse, someone had put it there. That night he asked his father about it. Henry sighed, rubbing his temples. It ain't real, David. Not anymore. Just a piece of the past folks won't let go of. But why was it there? His father didn't answer. David didn't push. But as the days passed, more signs appeared. One outside the church, another near the courthouse. Each one carrying the weight of history. Each one reminding him that some things never left. The final straw came when he found one outside his father's house. This one wasn't faded, it was fresh. You don't belong. David ripped it down, his heart pounding. He stormed into the house, the sign clenched in his fists. Who's doing this? He demanded. Henry looked at him, tired. You already know. David shook his head. I'm not just gonna let this happen. His father sighed. Then you best be ready, son, because they ain't gonna stop. That night, David stayed up watching the street from the porch. The town was quiet, too quiet. Then, boom, 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 the knocking came from the front door. Slow, deliberate. David stood. His father didn't move from his chair. Don't answer it, Henry warned. David ignored him. He opened the door. No one was there, just another sign nailed to the porch. Leave. David's blood ran cold. He stepped onto the porch looking around. The street was empty, but he knew they were watching. The next morning he found his car vandalized, scratched into the side, go back. David exhaled, forcing himself to stay calm, but inside he was burning. That night, the knocking returned. Boom, boom, boom. This time it wasn't the front door. It was his window. David's breath caught. He turned, staring at the curtains. A shadow moved outside. He grabbed the baseball bat from beside the door and stormed outside. No one was there, but the sign had changed. Midnight. David's heart pounded. At midnight he stood on the porch, gripping the bat. The wind howled, the trees swayed, and then they came, figures emerging from the darkness, shadows blending into the night. David tightened his grip. You think you can scare me? He shouted. No one spoke. Then, from the shadows, a voice. "You should have stayed gone." David didn't back down. He wouldn't. The past had haunted this town for too long. But it wasn't just his past anymore. It was his fight. And he wasn't leaving. David Reynolds had never been the type to back down. When he found the sign nailed to his father's porch, he had expected the fear to settle in, to make him reconsider staying in Greenville. But fear wasn't what came. Anger. A deep seething anger that had been buried for too long. The town wanted him gone. The shadows that lurked behind closed doors, the figures that left messages in the dead of night, the silent glances from those who refused to speak his name, it was all meant to drive him away. But David Reynolds wasn't leaving. The morning after the latest threat, he walked into town. He didn't sneak, didn't hide. He made sure they saw him. He walked past the diner where Tom Grayson and his friends always sat, their laughter turning quiet as he passed. He walked past the courthouse where the sign had appeared days before. He even stopped at the grocery store, locking eyes with the same woman who hadn't smiled when she rang him up. Shh. She looked away first. By the time he returned home, Henry was waiting for him on the porch, rocking slowly in his old wooden chair. "You're making yourself a target," his father said. David shrugged. "Maybe it's time they learned I don't scare easy." Henry exhaled, tapping a cigarette against the armrest. "Boy, I've seen men stronger than you run from this place. I'm not them." Henry looked at him for a long moment before shaking his head. "That's what I'm afraid of." That night, the knocking returned. Boom, boom, boom. It wasn't the front door this time. It was his bedroom window. David sat up, his chest tight. The street outside was dark, the night swallowing everything beyond the reach of the porch light. He grabbed the bat he had left by the door and stepped onto the porch. Silence. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying the scent of damp earth and something metallic. His skin prickled, the kind of instinctual warning that told him something was wrong. Then, a voice. He should have left. It came from somewhere in the dark. David's grip tightened around the bat. "You don't tell me where I belong." The voice didn't respond. But something moved. A figure, just beyond the trees. David stepped forward, but Henry's voice stopped him. "Get back inside." David turned to see his father standing in the doorway, his face unreadable. "You saw them," David said. Henry nodded. "And I know better than to chase shadows." David hesitated. His instincts told him to fight, but his father's warning held weight. Reluctantly, he stepped back inside, locking the door behind him. The knocking didn't come again that night. The next morning, something had changed. Greenville had always been a quiet town, but today it was different. The air was thick with tension. Conversations hushed when David walked past. Something had shifted. And then he saw it. His car. The tires slashed, the words "Stay Gone" spray painted across the hood. David clenched his jaw. This wasn't just a warning anymore, this was a promise. He turned and walked straight to the sheriff's office. Sheriff Buckner was an old man, tired-looking, with deep lines around his mouth. He leaned back in his chair as David walked in, chewing lazily on a toothpick. "What can I do for you, Reynolds?" David threw a picture of his car onto the desk. "You can start by telling me who did this." Buckner barely glanced at it. "Looks like a prank." "Pranks don't come with death threats." The sheriff sighed, rubbing his temples. "David, you've been gone a long time. Maybe folks just need to adjust to seeing you back." David scoffed. "Adjust? You mean they need time to figure out if they can get away with running me out again?" Buckner's gaze flicked up, something unreadable behind his eyes. Ain't no law against not wanting someone around. David leaned forward. There is a law against vandalism, against harassment, unless you're saying the law doesn't apply to me. The sheriff's jaw tightened. David didn't wait for a response. He turned and left. They weren't going to help him. He was on his own. That night, David sat on the porch with a shotgun resting across his lap. He wasn't leaving. If they wanted him gone, they were going to have to face him. And then, just past midnight, boom, boom, boom. Not at the door, not at the window. This time it came from inside the house. David's breath hitched. He turned slowly, looking over his shoulder. His father was sitting in his chair, staring at the hallway. The knocking came again. Boom, boom, boom. It was coming from his old bedroom. David stood, gripping the shotgun tighter. Henry didn't stop him this time. The hallway stretched before him, darker than it should have been. The door to his bedroom was closed, the wood warped slightly from years of humidity. He reached for the handle. He turned it, pushed it open. The room was empty, except for the writing on the wall. All down the loin. The letters were jagged, carved deep into the plaster. David stepped closer, his stomach twisting. His fingers brushed the grooves. The cuts were fresh. And then, a whisper, "You don't belong here." David spun, shotgun raised. No one was there, but the air was thick, suffocating. The shadows in the corners of the room stretched, bending unnaturally. And then the knocking came again, from inside the walls. Boom, boom, boom. David backed away. The whispers grew louder, overlapping, filling the space until it felt like they were crawling under his skin. The shotgun felt useless in his hands. He stumbled back into the hallway, slamming the door shut. His father was still in his chair, eyes unreadable. "They're trying to scare you," Henry said. David's breathing was ragged. "It's working." Henry exhaled, rubbing his temples. "Then they've already won." David clenched his fists. No, not this time. He wasn't leaving, but he also knew Greenville wasn't done with him yet.